Hello and welcome to another episode of Acting Prime Minister with me, Paul Brand. The podcast where we pick the PM and ask a different guest each week to imagine themselves behind that Downing Street door. And this week's Prime Minister is someone who does politics with personality, one of Parliament's more colourful characters and a sometime star of reality TV. He's been a broadcaster and a businessman, travelling the world to set up TV and radio stations, but today he gets his own podcast. Michael Fabricant, welcome to Acting Prime Minister.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you chose me because nobody else would choose me as Prime Minister, but hey.
I think you're going to be a fascinating Prime Minister.
Thank you.
And thanks for having us here in your office. Absolutely fantastic office, by the way. You definitely lucked out with the whips. I don't know what you've done to woo them.
Well, I've had this office since 1992, so it's quite something.
Which was when you first came into Parliament as well.
It is.
So, you know, you've had a good couple of decades in here to enjoy the view over the Thames. And clearly travel is important to you because there are lots of flags around the room. You're obviously into your international travel.
Yes.
And also I noticed a radio studio here, which I guess, again, comes back to your business.
Yes, well, I do
up.
interviews, you know, obviously, for BBC Local and National Radio or whatever, or commercial radio. And, you know, I used to set up outside broadcast equipment, so I thought, well, I'll get the proper kit for here as well. So that's exactly what I have.
And as you say,
in fact, you noticed maybe some souvenirs from my old broadcasting days. I've got a reel, and well, nobody will know what I'm talking about. It's called an NAB reel, stands for the National Association of Broadcasters, because it's an American standard, of magnetic tape. I've got nothing to play it on anymore. But
yeah, exactly.
You know,
I don't know what you do with tapes anymore. Put them in an archive somewhere, I think.
You put them on my desk because I've got it as a souvenir.
And as you say, you've been an MP since 1992. What do you make of all these newbies? Because there are loads of them, aren't there?
There are loads of them, and I'm walking around all the time with a little book with all the faces, and I'm very bad on names and faces anyway, so trying to recognise them, I still haven't quite got past the 2015 lot. So as for 2017 and 2019, you know, it's very tricky actually. I sort of smile at them and hope they don't expect me to actually say hello to Simon or whatever their names are.
I don't know how the speaker does it. He must have to sort of revise over the weekend or something to remember all these people.
Yes, but he also has a lovely lady by the name of Helen. And she's also clutching the same book as I've got. And she stands beside the speaker and will often say, you know, Fred Bloggs is standing.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
That's the guy with the blue shirt on.
Okay, well,
he calls Fred Bloggs, so he cheats like I have to cheat with my little book at times.
Well, let's promote you from the Commons now into Downing Street. You are Prime Minister for the next half an hour or so.
Oh dear.
And you've got a few minutes to settle in first and make yourself at home. What do you think is the picture that you might like to hang on the wall first?
Well, it won't be the Scream by much, even though I'm sort of thinking I'm going to scream. What would I like? I like Turner's, I've forgotten the name of the thing now, that wonderful old battleship being towed by the tug.
Oh yes, I do know what you mean, and I can't remember the name of it either. So
well, I'm glad we're both equally ignorant. So I like Turner. What other pictures do I like?
Is there someone who inspires you maybe that you might want a photo of on the wall?
Of course, what I would have to have is a painting of Lichfield in the Middle Ages. That would be lovely.
Okay.
And my house would be there, because where I live in Lichfield is right by the cathedral, and that house goes back to 1500s and beyond.
So while you're hanging all these pictures on the wall, you can also pour yourself a drink.
Yes.
What would be your drink of choice, do you think? What do you like?
Yes, well, I love red wine, so
glass of red wine.
Red wine. I tend to drink either Rioja or Malbec. You know, not that sophisticated, as long as it's smooth. I'm currently into Primitivos from southern Italy.
Right.
So I'm hoping for a good trade deal after Brexit, so we don't find I'm paying even more for the red wine. And also, occasionally, when I've got a croaky voice, which I have at the moment, I'll have very rarely a medicinal scotch.
Oh,
and I'm not
medicinal, right?
Medicinal, yes. And it's not I'm not very sophisticated on the scotch. I won't mention a name because it'll have to be bleeped out, I suppose. But I'm quite happy with a blended scotch, as long as it's nice and mellow.
Let's talk a bit now about your path to power too, a bit about your background, because you were born into a Jewish family. I believe this is all true. I got it from the internet, so tell me if it's wrong. Your father was a rabbi. Was that a particularly strict upbringing for you?
No, in fact, my dad really became more religious later in life. He'd been in army intelligence during the war. And he was, reasonably orthodox. He didn't have a beard or anything, though. And during the war, he experienced, he saw, particularly near the end of the war, what had been going on with concentration camps. And he told me that he didn't believe that this could be happening, actually, because he felt, that a civilized country like Germany, and he'd studied German and French and other languages at university, and that's how he went into army intelligence. He just couldn't believe that a civilized country like Germany could suddenly behave like this. And anyway, it made him more religious. I think it would have made me less religious. But anyway, it made him more religious and he became a rabbi. No, I mean, he ate kosher food. My parents ate kosher food. I unfortunately went the dark way because I discovered Chinese and Indian. But they were very laid back about it, and they just said, well, as long as you don't bring it in the house, what you choose to eat is your affair. So.
And would you describe yourself as religious now, or would you describe yourself as Jewish?
I don't think I was ever religious. I think being Jewish is like being a whip. I was a government whip for a long while, or an opposition whip, and you never stop forgetting being you were a whip. And similarly, I don't forget that I have a Jewish cultural heritage. And I'm, very sort of proud of the Jewish religion, actually, and the number of Nobel Prize winners it produces and all the rest of it. But I don't know whether there's a God or not. And I haven't been to synagogue in, sadly, 20 years, whereas I do go to Lichfield Cathedral a lot because I like cathedral music. And so I'll often go and chill out in the cathedral for evensong, because I let the music wash over me, and it's legal. Whereas if I try to relax in some other way, like smoking on a spliff, that's not so legal. So evensong is a better alternative.
Are you partial to a spliff?
When I was at university, yes.
Okay, well, let's talk about your adult life, because you were a broadcaster for a while, weren't you? And you're also a very successful businessman. You helped set up TV and radio stations around the world in lots of really interesting countries. And you made some pretty good money out of it, didn't you? It was pretty successful, right?
It went quite well, yes. And we sold the company, actually, to an American corporation. And my business partner and I, we had 88% of the shares. I remember we looked at each other and he just sort of shrugged as if to say, hey, this is a no-brainer. And that was the decision. So we just sold the company.
And so I'm guessing millions, really. I mean, it must have sort of set you up quite
Well, I'm very
nicely.
nervous here now because, the Inland Revenue may be watching this and thinking, hang on, has he paid his taxes? So, yeah, we did all right. And he bought a tennis club in Brighton. And I thought, hey, what do I do now? Now, the chairman of the company was an ex-broadcaster who had become an MP, sadly has passed away now, called Geoffrey Johnson Smith. He was the one who suggested I should get involved and interested in politics, because I was certainly interested in current affairs and worked in current affairs with the BBC. So, yeah, that's how I decided, right, I'd become an MP.
So
and I hadn't been a councillor or anything because I didn't have the time. I was abroad too much.
So you came straight into Parliament and you've had all sorts of roles as an MP. Obviously, you're someone who's very passionate about their constituency too. Have you ever wanted a job in Cabinet? Have you ever felt as though you would quite like the call
Well,
up?
I got in 92 and I was very ambitious in 92. When I got in, people couldn't understand me because, in those days they thought of people as being wet or dry. Now, I've always been Eurosceptic because of my experience of doing business in Europe compared to doing business in Australia and North America and Africa, the Far East and elsewhere. And I've always thought it was ridiculous the way we'd locked ourselves in with Europe at the expense of other parts of the world. But so I was dry in that respect. And yet I've always been very, very sort of pink on gay issues, on abortion issues, all these sort of socially liberal issues. Now that's pretty standard nowadays in the Conservative Party.
Yeah, not in 92.
Not in 92 it wasn't. And I voted for 16 as the age of consent for gay relationships because I thought, well, it would be terrible if some guy had AIDS or thought he might have AIDS or HIV positive and couldn't treat it because he'd be frightened of getting into trouble with the police or getting his partner into trouble with the police. And of course, it is 16 age of consent now and equality, but at the time when I voted for 16, everyone thought, my God, the guy's beyond the pale. But then you know what? In 97, we had the general election. There was, I don't know, was it a 10.5%, 11% swing, almost universally against the Conservatives. And the swing against me in Lichfield was about 0.5%. And I came back, and I think people began to think, you know what, maybe he is the future. Of course, the other thing they couldn't understand was the long hair, the honesty about occasionally smoking a spliff in the past. So what?
And I mean, you mentioned same-sex relationships there, and you did recently come out as bisexual, and that's something that maybe took you a little while to want to talk about publicly. Was there a reason for that? Was it something that you just feel is deeply
I was doing this
personal?
reality show that you mentioned I do reality shows, and I was doing this thing, First Dates. And the producer wanted to set me up with a guy, and I thought, no, I don't want that actually, because I've got lots of male friends, and I do find certain women very, very attractive.
This was Channel 4's First Dates, by the way, just so everyone knows what we're talking about here.
That's right. And I said, no, I'd rather do it with a woman. But on the other hand, I told them what sort of woman I wanted. This was discussed in great detail. And they then gave me the complete opposite. So it all ended in tears. I don't know if it was deliberate on their part, but it all ended in tears. But I said, look, if I do this, I don't want people to think I'm deceiving them. So I said, I'll come out as bi, if you don't mind. I think, actually, I'm going to be very controversial now. I think a lot of people are bi. I think, actually, it's only computers that are so dumb that they think in ones and noughts. Actually, everybody's on a scale. Whether they do anything about it is another matter. But, so I said I was bi, and the producer went, oh, you're prepared to say that, are you, on television? And I said, yeah, so what? But he said, no, it's a really big deal. We've never had an MP come out as bi before. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Anyway, I did the show. And then I thought to myself, it was shown. And I thought, over a weekend, I think it was, and I came back to the House of Commons. Lots of MPs had seen it. And I thought, what's the reaction going to be? And the only reaction was, God, what an awful date you got. Nobody was discussing the other great revelation.
Was it a big moment for you, that, though, to come out as bisexual?
No, because I'm so open. I remember a former chief whip years ago saying, Michael, there are lots of MPs who've got a lot of secrets. You've got a lot of things that should be secret, but they're not, because you don't mind talking about them. And frankly, it hasn't hurt me at all in Lichfield, my constituency, So
it was, for you, it was kind of an open secret, really. It was something that you hadn't put on the record, but you kind of felt everyone sort of knew about it.
But it still seems to be not on the record, because somebody sent me a page from a gay-ish magazine called Attitude, where it listed all the gay MPs in the various parties, and or bi, or anything else, and I wasn't listed at all. I'm going to sue them.
Got to get yourself on that list.
Yeah.
And look, you've spoken about the date, and let's not be too rude about her, because she's not here to defend herself, of course. But she was, saying some pretty tasty things to you, and you weren't very happy with some of the comments she made. For example, she talked about your hair, and that was
everyone talks about my hair. But it was very funny at the programme, because what happened was we were getting on reasonably well. And then one of the floor managers came up to me and said, oh, your mic's not working. So can we just get that sorted? And we went into a side room, and the guy fiddled. And I can tell you that, having worked in broadcasting, he didn't look at the transmitter because it was a radio mic or anything.
Right.
And I knew they just wanted to get me away from her so that they could. And lo and behold, it was when I came back, that's when she started pursuing it. And I wasn't very happy, because I just thought, it's nothing, how people look, frankly, is their own affair. And, to say someone is fat or got long hair, or they've got false teeth, or they've got false hair, or whatever, is very rude.
Does it upset you when people do make comments? Because lots of people always ask you, don't they? Is
Well, they
your
don't
hair,
ask me to my face.
Is your hair
usually.
your
No,
own?
they don't ask me.
Really?
They do it on social media, but usually they're anonymous. In fact, actually, I got victim support, or whatever they call it, in the House of Commons to say, am I traumatised by some of the Twitter attacks? No, I'm not traumatised. Because it's never by people, whether it's my hair or anything else, it's never by people who actually show a picture of themselves or give their real name. It's pathetic.
Because there was that other MP as well, Hugh Merriman, who sat behind you, who was talking about your hair and saying... He was pretty rude, saying...
and he was very apologetic. He didn't realise, because he was being a bit dumb at the time, that he was on camera.
I know. And what do you say to people when they say, when they say to you, oh, is it a wig? Because that is
But people
hurtful,
don't
isn't it?
ask me.
Right.
You're asking me.
Well, I don't want to
and
ask
you're
you.
hurting me.
Well,
you're hurting me. Paul, stop it. You're hurting me. Change the subject.
Right. You can appoint a cabinet. They can have whatever hairstyles they want. Who from history would you love to have in your cabinet as Prime Minister?
Oh, well, I've made out... So I was out last night in Soho,
right,
getting inspiration. So I've got a little list here.
Yeah, great.
Some from history, some not from history. Can I go for it?
Yeah, you can go for it.
It's not a comprehensive list.
I mean, it looks pretty comprehensive from here.
No. Well, it's just scribbled on my diary, so most of it's diary. So, for transport, head of transport, I'd have Julius Caesar, because he knows how to build straight roads.
Hope no one stabs you in the back, though, eh?
No, but, well, that always happens in politics, we know that. So, Roman roads, Julius Caesar.
Good idea.
International trade, let's go for Francis Drake. Why?
Yeah.
He was a buccaneer, sinking those Spanish galleons. All they were trying to do was peacefully go between, South America and Spain, bringing back loads of gold. But hey, the boats were wallowing, so give them a good shot across the bows and steal their gold. So let's have Francis Drake for international trade.
Excellent.
Now, for defence, I think you need someone who'll put the fear, absolute fear, into the heart of Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. Kenneth Williams.
Right, okay.
I can see Kenneth Williams deciding whether or not to use our deterrent. And of course, thinking of Kenneth Williams for health and social security. Health has to be Hattie Jakes. She'd bring back the matron.
This is going to be a very camp cabinet.
It's got a slightly camp cabinet, yes, slightly camp. And then finally, because I'm not going to go through the whole list, I thought, for DFID, a man at the moment who hasn't got a job but looking for one, Prince Harry.
Really? Prince Harry and DFID, that's quite a good one, actually.
International aid.
He's very interested in his African charities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you have actually got some pressing issues on your desk as Prime Minister, of course. One of them is Prince Harry. You're off to Buckingham Palace for your weekly meeting with the Queen. What would be your advice to Her Majesty about how to deal with this whole saga that's engulfed her family?
Well, of course, I did give her advice last week, but it all got a bit out of date because I wrote an open letter to her, published in a national newspaper, and I suggested that as a poll had just come out in Canada, and over 64%, I think it was, of the population said they would love it if he did it, to make, with of course Justin Trudeau, the French Prime Minister's permission. In fact, it actually has to come from him, but I think if the Queen said, if you'd like to suggest it, I'd agree it, make Prince Harry not only DFID Secretary, but Governor General of Canada.
Yeah, to solve that whole solution. He's got a job, he's got a reason to be over there with Meghan. Perfect. Okay, that just ties that up nicely.
And she can carry on filming Suits or whatever it was in Toronto. So,
Perfect. And secondly, you've got Brexit Day looming on Friday. I know you've already talked about being a supporter of Brexit. There's been a bit of a debate about how to celebrate Brexit Day. Should Big Ben, Bong, etc., etc. What kind of celebrations do you think you'd have?
Well, I know exactly what I'm doing on the night. On the night, I'm in Lichfield, and we're just having a bit of a party in Lichfield, so that's great. Personally, I'm not too bothered about Big Ben bonging, let alone bunging a bob for Big Ben's bongs.
Very good.
And you know what? For 1 minute's worth of bongs, I can live without it. Well, I'm personally going to celebrate in a few months' time, because I'm going to get myself, and you're going to say, how trivial, how pathetic. But I'm going to get myself something which will last me 10 years, not 1 minute worth of bonging, a blue passport.
Okay,
which is the original British passport.
Yeah, of course.
And you know what? The reason why the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand all have blue or black passports is because they copied the original passport. Britain was the first country to have one in the shape of a book, and that was the British blue or black passport. So we're the ones who sort of went off and got ourselves a maroon passport. I'm going to get back to having a blue one again, or a black one.
And of course, as Prime Minister, you can introduce any policy that you like, whether it's...
I've got a list.
Yeah, okay.
A list as long as... How many do you want?
Well, I think you're going to have to cut it down to maybe... What are your top three? Give me your top three
I'll tell you one which is very topical.
Yeah.
Which is not doing something, it's stopping something.
Okay. Is it HS2?
So I'm not saying scrap it. I'm not saying HS2 is terrible. I'm saying the route is crazy, because the original plan was, you see, to get people off aircraft travelling from, say, Manchester to Paris. Because city centre to city centre, it would be quicker by rail with the original route, where you'd have got on the train at Manchester Piccadilly and ended up in Paris. But now you've got to keep changing trains. So actually, it'll keep people on the train. What else would I do?
Go on, give me one other
So
one.
I'll give you one other. These are all, I would love to see a realms visa. That would mean that all the countries where the Queen is head of state, they can have a special visa so they can come here.
So they get priority over other immigrants to come?
Yes, I think it's nice for the Queen and all the rest of it. So that's just a little silly thing. But hey, it's a nice international thing. I've got a long list. A little thing I would do. So I'm half Welsh.
Yeah.
In Wales.
It's a shame you're only half Welsh. I'm full Welsh.
Ah, well, you will know then,
for you.
in Wales, if you go to any food shop, you know the score, 0 to 5 for hygiene.
Yes, yeah.
You have to display on the door. I call it scores on the doors.
Yes.
So whether you're visiting a bakery or whether you're visiting your favourite Indian, you instantly see in Wales whether they're a 1 or a 0 or a 5.
Yeah.
In England, they only display the scores on the doors if they got a good score.
Yes, yeah.
But people don't think about it. Yeah, you can look it up on the internet, but it works in Wales and it encourages other shops to be equally clean.
Okay.
So I'm all for that.
You'd be a hygienic Prime Minister.
I'd be a very hygienic Prime Minister.
And Labour, of course, are currently trying to choose their own new leader, who may one day end up as Prime Minister. Who would you most fear across that dispatch box among those candidates, do you think? Who do you think is the best candidate?
Wow. I think some of them, might be very good, but I don't think they've got... I don't want to name names because it's not very fair on them. I don't think they're great personalities, although I think, they would be very capable for the Labour Party. But I don't think they would be that capable at winning votes. I quite like Lisa Nandy, I think she's, but others I think may have half decent policies, but not be actually a great... I mean, I would select somebody like Jeremy Corbyn, because I want...
you want your opposition to be in the same position as they have been for the past couple of years. Right, quick fire round now.
Oh, right.
Yeah, just some fun questions. Greta Thunberg or Donald Trump?
I'm going to be abused now on social media. I don't know who is worse, a 60, 70-year-old bully or a 16-year-old who thinks she knows it all. So it's a hard call. And I am going to get abused, but I've got to say Donald Trump. But it's actually, they're pretty equal and in my opinion, pretty low down.
Greta's coming for you. Margaret Thatcher or Boris Johnson?
Well, both are conviction politicians, which is why people like them. I'm going to say Boris, not because I want promotion, but because I know Boris. I didn't really know Margaret Thatcher. I met
you
her
came in afterwards, didn't
I
you?
came in after, and a couple of times that I met her, and admittedly it was when she was in power in the 70s and whatever, so attitudes were different. I don't think she could have coped with my sexual flexibility, let alone references to smoking spliffs. Although actually she probably wouldn't know what I was talking about, so it wouldn't matter. I'll stick with Boris.
Okay, what would be your favourite pastime as Prime Minister?
As Prime Minister, or what is my favourite pastime?
Well, maybe you'd carry your current pastimes into Downing Street with you.
I would. So actually, it's not dissimilar at all from an immediate past Prime Minister. And indeed, I have met her by sheer coincidence doing a walk that I was on. And Theresa May was on a similar walk.
But you saw her in Snowdonia? Or...
Yes, I saw her in Snowdonia. And those people who know that area, I saw her on the Morfa Maldach Bridge, which is between Morfa Maldach and Barmouth, or Abermawi, for those people who are Welsh.
Did you have a nice chat?
Well, it was very funny, actually. I didn't recognise her because she had a woolly hat pulled over her head, and she had lost a lot of weight because it was just at that time before she was diagnosed with diabetes.
Oh, yes, okay.
And she had lost a lot of weight. And she came up to me and said, "Oh, hello, Michael," because we actually were walking in opposite directions on the bridge. And anybody knows that bridge. It's a railway bridge with a very narrow pedestrian walkway alongside the railway track. And I thought she was a constituent. So I sort of put my hand out, because you're not supposed to shake hands. Colleagues are not supposed to shake hands. And I said, "Hello, how lovely to see you," or "How marvellous, what are you doing here?" And sort of things that I say to people. And then I saw the guy behind her had a gun. He was trying to hide it, but he had a gun. And then I looked at her again, and I realised it was, in fact, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So I immediately sank to my knees and, kissed her hand. And no, I exaggerate. But yes, so walking is the short answer to your question. I'm a keen hill walker.
That wasn't the walking holiday where she was about to call an election, was it?
No, it was before.
Right. What song would you dance to at party conference? Do you have a particular taste in music?
I have a very wide taste in Europe because I love Mozart operas, but I also like good old rock and roll, probably a Bruce Springsteen number. Can't think of one at the moment, but, something like that.
What's the scandal that would bring you down?
Well, all the scandals that would bring me down, I've probably admitted to in this programme. So we've talked about drugs, we've talked about sex, we've just talked about rock and roll, so I can't think what else, really.
And do you ever dream of being Prime Minister? Is it something that you
No,
want to do?
I started to say at the beginning of the interview, and then I sidetracked myself. I was ambitious when I got in from 92 to 97, and near the end of 96, 97, I was then, a PPS to the Chancellor of the Exchequer and all that. So, But then for 13 years, we were out of office. And when we finally got back in, I was then in the Whip's office. And to be honest, I chose to leave because of HS2, although I loved the Whip's office. And before that, I was a shadow trade minister. But, tempus fugit, I rather like being able to talk to you, say
what you want to say.
What I want to say, and not worry, and not have Dominic Cummings saying, like Jacob Rees-Mogg, you go home, don't say a word.
Well, it's helpful for us to have you in that position, so long may it last. Michael Fabricant, thank you so much for coming on Acting Prime Minister. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you, Paul. I love the questions, apart from the hair.
Yeah, sorry about that.